Welcome back to Metaphysical Girl, a podcast about art and esoterica. I'm your host, Saint, internationally bestselling author and lifelong student of religion, folklore, and ritual. And I'm here today with the inimitable Maddie Martinez. Maddie is the author of the instant USA Today bestseller, The Maiden and Her Monster, a dark Sapphic fantasy reimagining of the Jewish myth of the Golem. I'm obsessed with this book and with Maddie, and I am so excited to have you here today in my home, in the studio.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yay! Oh, wonderful. So I always start by asking any guest to tell me a little bit about their spiritual or religious background. Where are you coming from in that area of your life?
Yeah, so I was raised Reformed Judaism, and I was pretty integrated into both the religious and cultural parts of that. That's kind of how I was raised. And to me, right now, the most important thing for me and something that I find a lot of comfort in is the cultural aspect.
What are the cultural aspects of Judaism that you feel most connected to right now?
I think a lot of it is based on community and engaging, like when I'm home, going to synagogue, the synagogue that I grew up in, and people known me there my whole life. Food and holidays are a big connection. And then also, I find a lot of comfort in doing research on the history of Judaism.
I love that. That's gorgeous. Thanks for sharing. And would you tell the people a little bit about Maiden, one of my favorite books of the last year?
Yes, of course. So, The Maiden and Her Monster, like Saint said, is a Sapphic reimagining of the Jewish myth of Golem. It follows a young woman who ventures into a cursed forest to hunt the monster that's been cursing the girls of her village. She finds a monster, but it's not who she expects, a disgraced golem who agrees to turn herself in, but if and only if she helps her free the imprisoned rabbi who created her first. This unravels a much more complicated political plot and forces her to face some growing feelings for the very creature she was once taught to fear.
You have your elevator pitch down. That is beautiful, tight, gorgeous, stunning.
I've been doing it for a while.
I know. When did this book come out? It was last year, but remind me again.
September 9.
September. Oh my gosh.
I know, which feels forever.
I feel like I've known her forever. I guess because I'm friends with you and I got an arc, but I mean, congratulations.
Thank you.
She's had a really beautiful run even so far, and there's so many more people who get to read and experience the book, but it is very beloved to me. So like you were saying, this is a dark historical fantasy, really rooted in its historicity. Could you discuss some of the historic time periods or events that you used as a springboard for the book to give the audience like a frame of reference?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I really take inspiration on when writing books in general is finding some themes that I think would be interesting to explore through a historical aspect, and then taking not so much individual events, but a general overview of a time period and what was important, what was going on, and how that reflected on society and the stories people told in those societies. With The Maiden and Her Monster, it's specifically inspired by the Golem of Prague, which is a rendition that was told in the 19th century, set in medieval Prague. It tells the story of this golem who was created to protect Jews from accusations of blood libel. So I knew I wanted to examine that story and give my own take on it. And I also was really interested in talking about anti-Semitism in the medieval ages and also religious nationalism and the pervasiveness of rule by the church in this era of time through a fictional lens. And so the combination of those things, which really clicked together in history, set the pathway towards this book.
For audience members or listeners who might not know, could you explain to us what a golem is?
Yes, there are different types of golems, and the story of the golem has been around for a very long time, way surpassing the Middle Ages.
It's an old school creature from folklore.
It's an old school creature from folklore that was first, I think, referenced in the Talmud, like it's old. But this specific rendition describes the golem as being a creature of stone or of mud, clay, crafted from the earth using Jewish magic and made into a sentient man. There's some renditions where the creature was made by putting the word of God into the golem's mouth. There are other renditions where the word emet was put on its forehead, and that's how it was brought to life, which is a Jewish word that means truth. So there are various methods of how to create a golem, and it is a pretty infamous creature who I think has infiltrated a lot of popular culture.
I think sometimes it's easy for us to lose track of the actual cultural or historic roots of a piece of folklore. And, folklore is alive and it exists through the telling and the retelling and the reimagining. Everything from a very culturally specific story to something like urban legends. But it's good to remember the cultural forces that these stories respond to and continue to respond to as they're told over and over again.
Yes, definitely.
You've talked a little bit about church-controlled state powers and religious nationalism, particularly through the lens of the medieval period in Europe and the control of the Catholic Church. And there is a lot of interplay between religion and imperial power and the corruption of religion in this book. We've got forced tithes, simony, bribery, violence, blood libel. All the greatest, most terrible hits. We really have been doing this as human beings to each other since the beginning of time, particularly when those who hold national and military power also have the leverage of religion and can lean on the belief that they have the power of God behind them. I have a bachelor's in political science from Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, and a master's in international peace and conflict resolution from American University in Washington, D.C. So I know that you have thought through these things. And I'd love to hear you talk about some of the choices you made incorporating those political themes into the book.
Before I jump into that, I wanted to say that what you said, that we've really been dealing with this for a long time, is so true, because I remember when I was working on this book, I was referencing things that happened in history, and then I would turn on the news and it was happening again. It really is so cyclical, and we're still dealing with so many of these issues that we have been dealing for thousands of years. I think what was really interesting to me was the period of the Holy Roman Empire where the Catholic Church was in control. I really find like the near collapse of empires to be really fascinating. One of the things that I did want to explore in this book was what happens when this large religious political power slowly starts to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that was fun to play with. Who's going to fill the power vacuum?
Yep.
Is it better or worse? What will people in power who are losing power do to try to grasp onto that power? I think creating a national identity based off of a religion, which means often that in a society, anybody who is not that religion is pressed. That was really interesting to me. And I think in my examination of this, I came across this liturgical poem, a parody on is it Catholic or Christian Passion?
Typically, when we say the Passion, that's Christian language for the story that we tell and remember at Easter, which is the trial, the condemnation of Jesus, the historical person of Jesus Christ, through the road to Golgotha and all the sufferings and trials through the crucifixion. But also in the medieval period, you have something called passions, which are passion plays or staged retellings of the Passion people would do during Easter, sometimes even as like traveling shows and troops. So when we say the Passion, it's a catch-all for talking about this important part of the religious story, but it also refers to the thing you do when you tell that part of the story and you put on a little show.
Yes. I did not know that.
Medieval passions are really interesting. We had these big theatrical troupes at certain points who would go from town to town and put on shows and like shut down the whole town and make a festival out of it. And it's like early patronage of the arts in that way.
Well, I think it was probably parodying that. It was called The Passion of the Jews of Prague. And it told about this pogrom that happened in Prague. Reading that, I was like, wow, we really don't talk about anti-Semitism and like religious oppression of Jews in the medieval time period nearly as much as we do in the 19th century or the 20th century. That kind of led me to the stories of the blood libel. And the blood libel is a major part of the myth of the Golem of Prague, because the Jews of this community of Prague were being accused of using Christian bloodletting Christians to use for some
made up
bullshit like
made up
magic
ritual purpose. Yeah.
That didn't actually happen. But that was the accusation, and that was how often they hunted Jews. Because this was becoming more of an issue, the Maharal, who is one of the rabbis in Prague, decides to create this creature called the Golem, whose sole purpose is to protect Jews from this accusation of blood libel. It's like, if they're going to use violence against us, we're going to use violence against them. And I found the idea of violence really interesting in terms of historical context and how violence is used in oppression, but also in fighting back against oppressors. And so that was a lot of the historical context of religion and nationhood that I was interested in.
Something that I appreciated, that I was like, oh, we're in the mess now. The empire that you're talking about in Maiden, this fictional empire, has gone through a series of like false popes.
Yeah.
And like there's been schisms around which popes are valid and authentic and who actually has the spiritual and political power, which is something that has happened in history at moments of great instability, which does not bode well.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, we're doing Avignon. Like, I know what's up. You guys are not doing good. I liked those peeks that we got behind the curtain, even from characters who aren't in these rooms of power and aren't from the religious group that's making these decisions, into trying to consolidate power. I think that's a really interesting thing to explore, and different characters having different opinions on, should we use violence? How should we be managing power? Where is the interplay between religion or the state? It was just really compelling stuff to me.
Thank you. Yeah, and how different the kingdoms within the empire feel about the control of the church and the control of the empire was something I wanted to play with too, because again, collapses don't happen like overnight. So that was fun to play with.
This is somewhat related, but have you read The Trial of God? It's a play by Elie Wiesel.
No.
This is something that I read in college because I have almost a religion minor in college. And then I went on to do my master's in divinity. But my focus in college in religious studies was particularly on the problem of evil. Particularly in Christianity, we make proclamations about God being all-powerful, all-knowing, and or all good, and yet suffering exists. And yet evil happens. There's a lot of really interesting and powerful art that's come out of this. But in my doing that study, I read Trial of God. It takes place in a town after a pogrom has just happened. And this innkeeper who has lost his family in the pogrom decides that he is going to put God on trial for allowing this to happen. And the only person who shows up to defend God is Satan. So it's playing with that Book of Job discussion of, who are God and Satan to each other? Is everything ultimately a tool? Does God suffer with us? Is God absent from the suffering? And of course, Elie Wiesel was a survivor of the Holocaust. So it's a really powerful story, but it just reminded me of what you're saying about how history can repeat itself and these questions that we're forced to ask ourselves in our communities. But I think it's in that wrestling and that questioning and that coming together as a community that healing is possible. I just really appreciated how you engaged with so many of those themes with this book.
There's a scene in the book and actually a quote that is said by a character that's like, why would God do this?
Yeah.
Because I think it's a very relevant question that Jews have asked for
Millennia.
Yeah. And the Maharal, the rabbi, when faced with this question of why does God allow atrocities to happen, says it's true that God is in those atrocities, in the hate and violence that our people experience. But they are also in our faith, in our ability to recover and to take one step after the other in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Yeah, that was a really important question, I think, for me to ask and for me to wrestle with in The Maiden and Her Monster.
Seeing how people chew on that and navigate it with themselves feels very intimate to me, and it's something I always really appreciate. And I think that there is something holy in asking that question in community and with people you love. I think there's something really sacred in that. It's just always beautiful to see a book that really goes there and explores that part of the human condition. We've talked a bit about the political and the religious interplay, but there's also this really cool interplay in Maiden, which I'm just going to geek out about so much, which is, this magic system that you've created called Kefesh in the book. And for the listener, it's a culturally specific magic system linked to prayer and sacred language that was reminiscent of Kabbalah for me, but you mentioned when I was talking to you before we started recording that you were actually drawing an even older kind of inspiration as you were building this out. So please tell us a bit about the magic system in this book, because that will set us up for all my nerdy magical questions. Hello, Seekers. Saint here to remind you very quickly that Metaphysical Girl is a listener-supported podcast. So if you like what you hear here, please follow this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and consider joining the Metaphysical Girl community over on Substack at saint.substack.com. That's where you can get access to twice monthly long-form essays, private tarot readings with me, and of course, the Metaphysical Girl After Dark episodes, where we go darker, deeper, and a little bit more mystical with the subject matter. Thank you for listening and for all of your support.
Of course. So the story of the Golem of Prague, the golem in that story is created with Kabbalah. The field of Jewish mysticism is so vast, and
Yeah.
people spend their whole lives studying it. For me, I knew I wanted to do the version of mysticism in this book justice, but I was more inspired by pre-Kabbalistic thoughts about Jewish mysticism. Actually, if you look in the front of the book for the epigraph, it's this quote from the Sefer Yetzirah. It means Book of Creation, and it is thought to be from around the 3rd to the 6th century. It talks about the connection of language to the creation of the universe. And so each letter was used to create a different part of the universe. So the epigraph says 22 letters to start with. He engraved, queried, and weighed, exchanged, and combined, and with them formed all of creation and all that he was destined to fashion. I found a lot of inspiration from how we combine letters shapes the actions of the world and the formation of the world. And so that was more so where the magic system came from rather than what it transformed into centuries later. And so that's why so much of the book is about writing letters in this holy language and having the combination of those letters form meanings and actions that manipulate the earth around them.
There's so many moments in this book where characters will add or take away a single letter or even just like change the presentation of something slightly to alter what happens and like aligning kind of this prayerful intent with that. It was just a really cool thing to see happen on the page. Like it's very pleasurable as a reader.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to give credit to like the story of the golem for that. The story of the Golem of Prague goes that he was created with emet on his forehead, which means truth, which brought this creature to life. And when people started to worry about the violence that this creature could cause, the Maharal was forced to put him to rest inside the synagogue. And what he did to do that was he changed emet to met on the forehead, which means death. It was a new command created from this old word by the transformation of it.
Yeah.
That's what I was inspired by a lot as well.
That's awesome. I love that. Something that I am personally very obsessed with is this very thin line between religious practice and magical practice that we as people draw and redraw culturally over time as practice changes, as language changes, and also as who is telling the story, who is recording history, and who is in power changes. Even in something like British folk magic traditions, things that we would call magic that the same community would be doing in the same village in the same span of 100 years might be categorized as medicine, as religious practice, as magic derogatory, or as magic complementary, or as just what we do to make sure that we don't get a cold, which is really interesting to me. So that's just one example, but it's something that influences so much of how we approach, how we even define what is magic, what is religion, what is cultural. This book really digs into the interplay of that a lot. There was a quote that I really liked. Can I read it?
Yes, of course.
The Maharal is magical because of his devout prayer and belief. I have seen you whisper prayers over your meals. I know the meaning of the necklace you wear. Do you not think you could wield prayer into magic? Just so interesting that you're kind of pulling on this same thread of devotion in different ways.
That was really fun and special for me to play with, I think. Going back to the story of the golem, one of the questions that it wrestles with is it too much into God's domain to create life? Again, this golem was created from the earth and was made sentient.
Which is very similar to the creation myth in the book of Genesis.
Yes. So is this magic too close to this power that is explicitly deemed as something only God should be able to hold?
Right.
And what does it mean to have mysticism and to brush up against God with magic and creation, especially talking about this magic system based off of language in this book that creates the universe, because obviously creation is the thing
Yeah.
in Genesis that we talk about God doing. And I think it's really interesting to wrestle with, is it blasphemy to have power, which is what Malka thinks because her grandfather thinks that at the beginning, or is it a way to feel closer to God, which she finds that opinion in some of the people she meets along the way. Where do you find you belong in that balance between belief and power? And magic is super interesting, again, across religion, the way that people have viewed power as deviltry, and even how blood libel was thought to create like
It's a witchcraft
it's a
accusation as
witchcraft
well. Yeah.
accusation, and how power is related to evil.
Yeah, this is something that comes up in the academic field of the study of religion and occultism so much. How are we even defining these things so that we can identify them and that we can explore them anthropologically or historically or in practice? Kind of like what I was saying earlier about the boundary line shifting so much. I was just reading about a really interesting discussion that was happening about astrology in England and like the court system. You know, a lot of astrological knowledge had started coming in from the continent and from like the Arab world and was being able to be translated and used. So people suddenly have access to science that they hadn't really been able to study for a long time. And you have people who are then in England who are trained in this discipline, some of whom were at the Arab universities and then came over. But there was all of these discussions going on in the academy and with the clergy and with the kings, which would like change king to king of whether it was criminalized or not, because some people were saying, okay, you can do astrology if it's to like just observe the heavens, which is God's domain. You're just observing the natural order and predicting like famines or the weather or the outbreak of war because you're observing what God has ordained and it's a public service. It's a public good. Therefore, it's good. But if you try to predict the future, are we doing divination? And is it bad? If we're doing horoscopes, are you looking into someone's life in a way that you shouldn't? Or did God put that there so that you should know? People were feuding about this. And in some ways, we still are. It can change so quickly. And it's so interesting how everyone is bringing their own, not just academic background, but their own lived experience and their own faith and positioning on like the way that the world works and what is within our purview, which I think is really cool.
Even within Jewish mysticism, there are sects that are not considered like part of the like Balic canon. And it's really interesting to think about like what is included, what is generally agreed upon, and then what is this like outlandish fringe belief, and how do we decide what's included or not. It's very interesting.
It is super interesting. I think my final note on the magic here, Malka says, in a really cool scene that I won't spoil, but Malka says, magic makes her feel closer to Yohev, her people's god, but also that she will never be the same because she has experienced it. She's done it herself. So you present magic as something that can be constructive or destructive, but it takes a lot of responsibility to wield. You have characters who talk about it as an avenue for self-knowledge and devotional practice, but it can also be something that's a route to power, whether it's personal or political. How did you approach weaving together all those strands?
For me, the way that people interact with power is very similar to the way people interact with magic. For Malka, when she talks about like using it for the first time and how she doesn't think that she's going to be the same, I think it's because it's the first time that she's allowed herself to have power that was not given to her, but
Right.
that she took for herself and came from within her.
Yeah.
And that was really important for her character because she's in a position where she doesn't get a lot of external power. This illiterate village girl who grew up not even being able to hear the news on her own. She had to have it told to her by the merchants who came back from the capital city. She didn't get an education. She's found her belief in her religion gave her strength and gave her power. That was really fun to play with. One of the other ways that it comes across too is you see other people try to use the power
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's not to give themselves internal power, but to give themselves external power.
Like the difference between like agency or exerting force on the world.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think like the discussion between how is magic used and how does a magic that's based off of prayer and your relationship to the divine change when your motives change.
That's a very elegant way of putting that. That doesn't spoil anything about the book.
I tried really hard.
Good job, Maddie. I love it. Don't let me make you think that this book is just really super smart and political about religious and cultural things, because it is, but it's also full of yearning lesbianism with a 6-foot-tall woman.
6'5".
6'5". I always forget about that. She's so tall.
She's so tall.
There's this scene where she's like kneeling in front of Malka and she gets up really slowly.
Yeah.
Like just like to see how tall she is. I was giggling. I was kicking my feet. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about how much fun you had with the Sapphic elements of this delicious, tense, sexy relationship.
I think it was one of my favorite parts, honestly. One of the very early bits of creation and that would turn into this book is I really wanted to write a hot monster in the woods story. And I wanted it to be Sapphic, but I didn't quite know like how I wanted that to be.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of this feared monster who lives in these woods, who obviously you find out there's more to them than that.
Yeah.
And then this like village girl who is very naive and young and finds herself relating to the monstrous qualities.
Monster for monster.
Yeah.
Malka's not a monster. She's my baby girl. But I understand what you mean.
Other people see her as a monster.
Exactly.
We think of the monster as like difference. And so I think like that's how they bond at the beginning and throughout. I loved the idea of writing a romance about two people who it was literally the worst possible person that they could have fallen in love with, because obviously in the pitch Malka is sent into this forest to kill this monster, or to bring the monster back to be killed. That's the only way that she's going to be able to free her mother. So what happens when you fall for this monster, but you know that if you don't turn her in...
Yeah, she's the linchpin in your mother's freedom, basically.
Exactly. Do you give in to your feelings and betray your mom, or do you save your mom and betray your feelings? That's really delicious and fun. And I also love the idea of Nimra, this 6'5" lesbian golem, who is half made of stone, and her sole purpose was created to be violent.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question, and I think it was really fun for me to explore in a feminine lens, because usually the golem is like a masculine character, and in the story of the Golem of Prague, the golem does not speak. So I think that the story of the golem already sets up this issue of agency.
Yeah.
And so a woman figuring out her agency as a monster just felt natural. She's also very self-hating, because she literally was just created to be a monster, and she doesn't know how to be any other way. What happens when she starts to fall for somebody and she starts to want something outside of the scope of what she was created for?
What happens is Saint has a really good time.
I'm also
I love them.
I'm such a sucker for like down bad, like yearning quotes.
There are some truly crazy, like pressing my whole face into the book quotes in this. Like, oh,
Yes.
it's so, so good. One of my favorite little tennis matches between Malka and Nimra is really around storytelling. All of the characters in this book tell each other stories of mystics and holy men and kings, but they sometimes jump into each other's stories with alternate or contradictory endings, and they'll retell things again and again. And it's this really beautiful live wire intellectual source of connection and flirtation between these characters. But it's also, I really feel like, a celebration of oral tradition and the cultural and religious wisdom that gets wrapped within that tradition. So what does storytelling mean to you?
Yeah, storytelling, I mean, it was the crux of this book. To me, storytelling is really such a big part of my life. Growing up, I loved to hear stories, and I felt there was a sense of hope that really came from that oral tradition, and it makes you feel connected to your community and your culture, and it gives you new ways of thinking about morals and what's right or wrong through these stories. So there's that respect of stories. They're powerful in their way of doing that. And then when I started studying conflict and international conflict, ethnic conflict, religious conflict, the crux of it is always the story that's being told. If you look throughout history, I think people say like there's 3 sides to a story, which is like yours, mine, and the truth. I don't think that's true at all. I think that there is no truth in story. There's what is perceived to be true, and that's the only thing that really matters. And
2 people who go through the exact same thing do have 2 different true and lived experiences and memories in their body of that thing. Like, just from a foundational starting point, I don't think that we can be completely ontological about this.
Yes, yes, exactly. So there's often stories that are told about other groups or stories that are believed that create how you feel about other groups of people or that start a legacy of difference. That was really powerful for me too to tackle in this book because how do you change somebody's perspective in a story? And what does it mean to do that? Obviously, there's stories within stories in this, which were really fun to write. But yeah, people have different interpretations of stories because people have different interpretations of all stories. The story of the Golem of Prague, there's many interpretations of
Yeah.
it, and people have different perspectives of what does or does not fit into it depending on their background and what the society is like that they're living in. Also, it was just fun to have them flirt through how they understand stories and how those stories come into their lives and interact with their lives on a more like tangible level.
What a gorgeous place, I think, to end the main questions. Do you have a fun little tarot pull for you at the end? But really quick before we get into that, where can the good people find you? And do you have anything else coming out soon? Because I'm dying. I need a new Maddie book.
Yeah, so you can find me online, pretty much any platform at Maddie S. Martinez and on my website at maddiemartinez.com. Expect from me another Sapphic
Mm?
fantasy book that's going to come out early next year. Have more to say about that soon, but it was my first time really venturing into gothic romance. It explores a lot of the same kind of political and cultural elements that I explored in The Maiden and Her Monster.
Yeah.
So it's similar in that way, but it is definitely more gothic. It's darker, sexier, and more toxic.
Those are my favorite words.
Yes.
I'm so excited. Okay, let's get a nice crisp crack of the cards here. For the listener at home, I am a tarot reader. I've been reading tarot for 12 years now. And it's just one of my favorite little magic ways to connect with people. So to thank Maddie for coming on, I'm going to sling you a card and see what we get. You ready?
Yes.
Baby! Oh, I love that it's the 10 of Cups. This is really beautiful. This is like emotional fulfillment and happiness and contentment overflowing. The Cups rules our emotional worlds, and the 10 is kind of the exaltation of that big found family energy in this card, but also, any family that we build with a partner or with friends. Just this sense of like everything that you've worked for is worth it because you love well and you are loved well, and it's safe to just like relax in what you've accomplished and kick back a little bit. I know that you just accomplished something pretty big.
I just turned in my book.
Just turned in a book. So I think this is saying like you did it, baby. Slow down and feel the joy a little bit. Like call your friends, giggle on the phone, go do happy hour and just revel in it. You put in the work, now enjoy the results emotionally and creatively.
That's so nice.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Maddie, this was so beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for coming to my house even and doing it in the studio with me. The studio is just my apartment.
Your very beautiful, springy, glorious apartment.
Thank you. I've got my white floral spring bedding out with my little pink pillowcases. I have some pink drapery hung from the doorways. We're trying to make it festive. I am trying to spring max. I'm so proud of you. You are truly one of the smartest people that I know, and you are so talented. And I love living in a world where I get to not only read your books, but be friends with you. So thank
Aw.
you.
So sweet. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Yay! That's all I have for you this week, dear listeners. If you would like to become part of the Metaphysical Girl community on Substack, you can head over there and subscribe. At the paid tier, you get twice monthly essays as well as Metaphysical Girl After Dark episodes where we get darker, deeper, and a little bit sexier with the subject matter. You can also book a tarot reading with me, and do not forget to go read The Maiden and Her Monster and follow Maddie everywhere because she is a complete and total delight. Be safe and well until we two meet again.